Hi, how are you? I'm Phoebe Moonbeam. I hope you're doing good today. I thought I'd stop in and have a chat. Does that sound like a good idea? What's that? You say you don't know who I am? Well, I think I maybe should tell you then. My name, like I said, is Phoebe Moonbeam, and I live here in Wistman's Wood, and that's in England. It's out near Dartmoor in Devon, England, and it's beautiful here. As you can see behind me, this is a very, very neutral part of the wood. This is where the human realm and the fairy realm both coexist. And I figured this would be a great place to look at you through the magic mirror and say hello. So here I am in the wood, and it is a beautiful wood. And as you go further into the wood, there's these dwarf oaks, and they're these beautiful, beautiful old trees. And they are so green, and they form all these canopies all through the forest, and it's just magical. This is a very, very magical forest. It's so, so strong here. You can actually smell the magic. It's pretty amazing. You can see it sparkle in the air if you look close enough. So here I am in Dartmoor, in Wistman's Wood, like I said, and I bet you're wondering where I came from. Besides here, my mother, her name was Lady Aurora Morningstar, and she was a beautiful, beautiful woman. I never got a chance to know her, though. My father's name is Calypso, and Calypso is the king of the pixies here in Wistman's Wood. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and he raised me so well. He's very kind and very gentle, as most pixies are. And he taught me all that I needed to know. Him and his cousin and his sister all raised me together. See, a long time ago, he and my mom met quite by accident. Little known fact, pixies, or maybe it's not so little known. Maybe you already know. Pixies are very, very fond of sweets. And Calypso, he used to travel through this part of the wood, and he used to go just out there off to the side where there was a farmhouse. There's still a farmhouse out there, actually. But he used to watch this farmhouse and watch the people there, and there was a woman there who was a young maiden at the time, and she had long flowing locks, and she was there this particular day, and he watched her for a little while, and then he went off and played in the wood a little bit, and he got distracted. He got distracted by a smell, and it was a wonderful, tasty smell, and he followed it. He followed it all the way to the farmhouse. He could see that someone was setting this cake on the windowsill to cool. And he knew it was that maiden that he'd seen. But he couldn't resist. He didn't want to be seen, but you know what? Sometimes you got to take chances. So he scrambled across the field over to the house, and he scrambled up the side of the house, and he was just about to grab that cake and take a big bite when all of a sudden, Aurora turned around with a start and like this when she saw him. And he did the same thing. And when he did, he lost his hold on the building and he fell backwards in the grass. She rushed over to the window when she saw him fall, and she looked out. And there he was, laying on his back in the grass, laughing. And so she started laughing too. It was so infectious. He has that power over people. He could make anyone laugh. And so they both laughed. And she asked him, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I could not resist the smell of that wonderful, wonderful cake. I just needed a taste." She said, "You know what? I think maybe we should share that cake." And so she grabbed it off the windowsill, and they sat down and they shared that cake together. And it tasted every bit as good as it smelled. And they laughed and they talked and they had a wonderful, wonderful time that day. And they had such a wonderful time that they started spending more and more time together. They would go out into Wistman's wood and they'd wander through these trees here, and they would chase each other, and they would dance, and they would laugh, and they would sing, and they just had so much fun. And over the course of time, they fell in love. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to fall in love, you know. And it happened on one particular night, when they had fallen deeply, deeply in love. There was a full moon, and the moon was shining so bright, and it had shone down on the wood where we are right now. And he decided that was the moment. And so he turned to Aurora, and he said, "Please, please, will you be my wife?" And she agreed wholeheartedly. She was so, so happy. And so they planned on the following full moon to wed. And she went back to her house, and she kept it a secret because her parents would have never allowed such a thing. She had been promised to the Lord Ulrich. And Lord Ulrich is a mean, mean tyrant. He is an awful, awful man. But he had threatened to burn down the house and all the fields if they didn't agree to let Aurora marry him. So they really didn't have a choice. So Aurora was aware of this, and Aurora decided she was not going to say anything until after she was wed, because then they couldn't do anything about it. So she kept her secret, and they kept playing and hanging out every single day, and they had a wonderful, wonderful time planning their wedding. And then the time came, and she waited until after her parents were in bed, and then she snuck out of the house, out into the wood. And she had a beautiful white dress on that day, a very simple one, but a white dress all the same. And as she crept into the forest, there was a canopy of stars almost at her level. They sparkled so bright, and the moon was shining so prettily in the sky, and the sky was deep, deep, deep blue. And everyone was there. All of the woodland creatures had put aside their differences for this one magical night. There were fairies, and there were sprites, and there were gnomes, and there were nymphs, and of course there were lots of pixies. Everyone had come out for this magical, wonderful night. And so they were wed. And it was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And they were so very happy. But she had to go home that night. So she snuck back into her house before her parents awoke. And the next day, she had to tell them the news. They didn't like it very much. But they came to an arrangement where Aurora would come to the house every day. And then she would go home to Calypso every night. And it seemed like a wonderful plan. So maybe Lord Ulrich would lose interest in her. Time would have that he never did. And one day, he paid a visit to her parents, and Aurora wasn't home. And he was not happy. And so he demanded that he wed her the following day, and that they take Aurora and lock her up so that he was sure to have her there the following day to wed him. And so they did. When she came home, they locked her in her room, and they kept her there. And when they fell asleep, Aurora looked out this little window in her room, and she knew she could never sneak out of this window because it was just too small. She was wishing in that moment that she was as small as some of her pixie friends. The moon was shining that night because it was full, and it was very, very bright. It was an extra bright moon that night. And she knew that under the full moon, the magic is the strongest it is ever out of the entire year, always under a full moon. So she called upon that magic. See, Calypso had taught her a little bit about the pixie ways, and he had taught her how to get into that magic. And so she called upon it. She called upon the magic of all the woodland to set her free from this. And soon she noticed the lock on the door was coming unlatched. And so she crept out on silent feet, and she stayed right to the edges of the forest because she knew there were sentries out there Lord Ulrich was taking no chances, so he was keeping an eye on the house. And she was almost to the wood, like just over there actually. And she stepped on a branch. And that little snapping sound set off everyone, and they all knew that she had escaped. So they all came running after her, and she ran as fast as she could. And as soon as you get a little further into the forest, you've hit the realm. And as soon as you hit the realm, the magic will enshroud you. She was able to get all the way there before they caught up with her. And then she knew she was safe, so she slowed her pace a little bit. And that night was the night that I came to be. So she was still running, but running a little slower, and she was going to go to the Pixie Glen. All of a sudden, she heard this bellowing voice, and she knew. She shuddered when she knew. It was Lord Ulrich, and she heard a second voice with him, and it was a druid. And druids have the power to get through that secondary magic. So they were coming on her fast, and she ran as fast as she could to get away from them. And she knew that I was coming that night, so she was very, very scared. And soon she tripped and she fell. Luckily, she fell in this wonderful, beautiful part of the forest where there's a flat, flat rock. And on that rock, there's moss that covers that rock in a thick, soft carpet, and that's where she fell. And that is when I arrived. And she was very, very scared because here she had a baby, and she's out in the woods, and he's coming very, very quickly. And just then she noticed there was a big tree that was lining the side of the stone. And it had a little hollow in the bottom that was open. And so she took me and she gave me one last kiss on my forehead. And she put me in that hollow and she covered me up with leaves and pine needles, and she left me there. And then she ran the other way as fast as she could away from the Pixie Glen. And she hoped with all her might that Calypso would find me. And in that instant, as I said, that magic's very, very strong when there's a full moon. In that instant, Calypso knew. He knew I had arrived, and he knew that Aurora had been captured. He left very, very quickly to go and find Aurora. And just then, he noticed that there was a beam coming from the moon, and it was a special beam. There was a light, and it was coming from the moon, and it was not like any moonbeam he had ever seen. This moonbeam had rainbows in it. There were sparkling colors swirling through the beam, and he followed that because it was a beacon. He knew it was a beacon. He knew he was supposed to follow it, and he followed it out into the outer part of the wood, and there he saw that same place that I just explained, with the moss and the long stone and the oak tree that had lain on its side. And he wondered what had guided him to this place. And then he heard a rustle. That rustling, he looked towards very, very fast because he thought someone was there. And he saw a little tiny hand coming out of the hollow of the bottom of the tree. And he ran over and he uncovered all of the leaves and the pine needles, and there I was, this baby alone out there in the woods. And so he gathered me up in his arms, and he knew that I was his. And he ran back to the Pixie Glen with me, and he left me with his cousin and his sister, and he ran off to try to find Aurora. Unfortunately, he didn't find her that night, so he came back, and he was quite sad, but he knew that he needed to take care of me, and I was there, and that was a very important thing. So he, along with his sister and his cousin, and they raised me in all the pixie ways. And his cousin Dulcina and his sister Charisse, they both taught me so much. They taught me all about the pixie magic, and they showed me how to do so many things. And they showed me all of the plants in the forest that we could use. There is a lot of things you can do with these plants in the forest, and a lot of ailments that you can heal. And I grew up that way. out there in the Pixie Glen, and I was so happy. I played with all the other pixie children, and we had a wonderful time. But as you know, I'm half human. And the thing about being half human and half pixie is you never know how big you're going to get. You could stay really little, or you can grow really big. I grew really big. And it wasn't very long before I outgrew our house out there in the wood. And so we had to build me a new house. So what we did is we grabbed fallen trees and we stacked them up, and we got some clay and some mud, and we secured them to each other, and we tied them up with vines, and they stayed there. And we made my little house that way, and we got some grass, and we thatched it all together, and we made a roof for me. And in the house, we brought stones from the wood, and we stacked them up to make a fireplace and a stone chimney. And we had this little chimney that came out of the house. And that is where I spent the second half of my childhood. And that is where I still live today. It's out back there in the Pixie Glen. I wish I could show it to you. But here we are in the human realm, and that is in the fairy realm. And we can't go there unless you have a special invitation. Perhaps one day you might. That would be wonderful. I'd love to show you all of the things there. But if you ever come out here to Wistman's Wood, I would be happy to show you around this part of it, because there's so much to see. And it's so beautiful. As time went on, the pixies really looked up to me. See, I had something special that they didn't have. I had their pixie magic, and I also had the human side of me. So in the beginning, they taught me all about the pixie side of me, and it was very helpful. And I don't think I would be where I am now if it weren't for that. And they taught me all the pixie ways, and it was a wonderful thing. But see, I have this human side as well. And so I used to come to this part of Wistman's Wood, and I was one of the very few magical beings that came out to this part of the wood. And I used to come here, and I used to get in touch with the human side of me and learn some of the human things. And when I would come back, the pixies would all gather around me and ask me endless questions about it. And so I would answer, and I would tell them all about the other side of the wood. And I would tell them all about the other side of the world and the rolling countryside and the fields and the farms. And soon they dubbed me Princess of the Pixies, which I suppose was pretty fitting considering Calypso is my father, and Calypso's the king of the fairies in this area. It was a wonderful thing to be called. Do you hear that? Oh my goodness, do you hear that music? It sounds like it's getting closer. Oh my goodness, the time's gotten away from me. We have guests here in the wood today. I totally forgot. Oh my goodness, I simply must go and meet them. We have these wonderful people here today, and they are called the Misfits of Avalon. Have you ever heard of them? My goodness, they sound wonderful. I simply must meet them. Oh my, do you hear that music? I think I have to go. It's been lovely chatting with you today, and I have had so much fun. But I simply must go check out that music. I hope to see you very soon. And if you ever come out to Wistman's Wood, please ask for me, and I will be happy to show you around. You have a wonderful day. It's been so lovely chatting with you. I simply must go check out that music now, though. Goodbye!